So today we're going to talk about creating a session. So when you open up Pro Tools, if you're using Pro Tools 10 or using Pro Tools 11, it doesn't really matter because this is the first window you will see. You will see create a session from a template. This is actually really good. I use this a lot because it's easier for me to get into the session really quick and import stuff into the session, especially if I'm working on film projects or television projects. So here you have post-production, guitar icon, music, miscellaneous music, post-production, recording, mixing, songwriting, venue, live, which is the live console. So if you're using a profile or any venue from Avid, you could set this up and it should set up all your I/O stuff and work right away and you could just hit record. It also helps back for what's called virtual sound check. That's a totally different lesson. We'll talk about that in a later video. But get familiar with the templates because it will come to be used a lot, especially when you're first starting out in Pro Tools. And then you have create blank session. It's just going to create a blank session with no tracks, pretty much nothing. It's just going to open Pro Tools and you got to add everything you want. If I'm starting a recording from fresh, sometimes I will use this, but I usually will have a template ready with all my inputs and everything already set up. Recent sessions. So here you see I was working on some stuff, so you will see all the recent sessions that I have worked on. Open the session. This really is, you have to specifically go find where the session lives at. So if you have a session that lives on one of your hard drives, you will use this one and you will use open session. You will go straight to the folder that the session lives in and you'll open it from there. So let's talk more about the window that you see in front of you. So show a quick dialog when Pro Tools starts. You could turn this on, you could turn this off. If you turn it off, you have to go into Pro Tools preference to turn it back on. I like having it on because, especially for open recent sessions, it's fast to get in there. With Pro Tools, I usually will work on the same project for a week straight, so having this on works perfect for me. Audio file type, broadcast waveform is WAV. It was wave. So this is technically standard. And then you could get from AIFF. The new thing with Pro Tools 11 is that AIFF and broadcast waveform will work in one session, within one session. So that's a good thing. Sample rates. Now, the difference between, we could get into a video later on about just kilohertz and what 48 kilohertz versus 44.1 kilohertz versus 88.2 kilohertz. We could get into a later video about that and exactly what that means. This pretty much kilohertz. This is pretty much telling the Pro Tools what kilohertz you want to record in. Sample rates are technically snapshots. It's recording. So if you pick 48 kilohertz, it's recording 48,000 snapshots at one time. It's recording 48,000 snapshots per second. The higher your kilobits are, the higher it is, the more definition you get. So if you're recording off a console per se, like using a Neve and you're going into your console or using an SSL, you will pick, if you want the true sound of that console to come through, you'll pick a higher, like 96 or 196 kilohertz. So it's the quality of recording you're getting, and it's the more definition you get in the recording and the clarity of the recording you'll get will come through the analog, the microphone, and all that stuff will come through what kilohertz you pick. But that also ties in with the bit depth. The bit depth it also ties into. So the higher the number is, the more higher fidelity you will get. I'm a big advocate of using 96 kilohertz for jazz and classical music because I kind of want to hear the pristine of the room, pristine of the microphones I'm using. I'm a big advocate of that. If you're if you're working on film, and this has changed in the past years, but 90% of all films will use 48 kilohertz. It's just the standard of everything. I think it works better with the syncing of 24 frames, 48 kilohertz to sync better. So if I'm working on music I'll use 48, 44, or 96. It depends what type of music. If I'm working on classical music, recording strings, if I'm recording jazz, I would do 96 because I like to hear the pristine of the room, the microphones, and if I'm going through a console, I want to hear those preamps, the console, I want to hear the compression of the console and stuff like that. If I'm working on film, I'm definitely working at 48 kilohertz because it's just friendlier and it's the industry standard. Last I/O settings. I/O settings. Last use, pretty much if you used Pro Tools previously, it's just going to default to that. But if you click on it, you have stereo, which is just going to route it to stereo using whatever I/Os you're using. You have the C24 LE stereo, you have the C24 mix, Control 24, all this stuff. And if you have 5.1, it will show up here too. Bit depth is, best way to explain bit depth is volume or intensity of what's being recorded. Now, please keep in mind, if you have a high bit depth, like 32 flow point and 96 kilohertz, takes up a lot more hard drive space. So keep that in mind. I usually stay between 24, 48. The interleave option here pretty much tell Pro Tools that if you're recording a stereo track, so when we go into the movie of creating a track, when you record a stereo track, before Pro Tools will separate those tracks. So you will have one file for the left channel, you have another file for the right channel. By having this activated, you only have one file for the stereo track, so it'll be left and right. So that's going to do it for this video. If you guys have any questions, you want anything for us to review, any tips you wanted us to show, just send us an email that you see on the screen. We have a bunch of stuff coming soon, sitting down with the top end of recording artists out there that are using Pro Tools, how they use Pro Tools in their work environment, mixing engineers and stuff like that. So stay tuned. We have also a bunch of studio tours starting up and being recorded and stuff like that. So see you guys in the next video.